the way from New Jersey. We are joined by author Richard Stripp, who has written this really incredible book, Mommy, I Wish I Could Tell You What They Did to Me in School Today. I'm facing the wrong way. Here we go. There we go. All right, there's the book. So, Richard, first of all, thank you so much for being here with us, because you're a long way from home, but we appreciate that you're here in the studio with us. And let's talk a little bit about this book, because it's a really important book that you have written. And what is you've got a really lengthy experience of working with children who have special needs. Tell our viewers what that experience entails.
Well, I started out years ago. I actually had an automotive repair business, and a school approached me about having some students work at the shop on a work-study program, and I actually had 2 students that had cystic fibrosis work with me. So that was my first exposure to children with medical needs. And then after I sold the shop, I had bought another business, and a close friend of mine had passed away on a motorcycle, and I was very depressed about it. And my wife suggested that I do some work with some special needs children. And I started working part-time doing respite work with children with autism and children with cerebral palsy and that type of thing. A gentleman who frequented my restaurant was a superintendent of a special needs school district, and he ultimately offered me a job and was very impressed with the work that I did with the children, and that's how I started.
Wow, and so you worked in schools for a number of years.
About 10 years I worked in schools that were strictly special needs schools. The majority of my time was spent in a school that serviced children with multiple disabilities. Okay. There was children with Down syndrome, children with autism, cerebral palsy, spina bifida. We had blind children. It was a wide variety. And then the last year of my employment before I left, I was working in a school that was strictly autistic children.
Okay. And you got to see an awful lot of things in that 10 years in classrooms that was not always encouraging.
That's correct.
It's kind of an understatement, is what it really is.
It is an understatement. Some things that I saw were just horrible. I tried talking to the people. When I say horrible, there was just downright abuse, both physical and emotional abuse. There was neglect. I tried addressing it with the staff that was guilty of these atrocities, quite frankly. I tried going to the administration. I tried going to the superintendent of the district and got nowhere. I reported numerous times to the state in New Jersey. There's the state agency that handles these matters is called the Division of Youth and Family Services. I reported numerous times incidents of abuse. They would come and do an investigation. I was never privy to the outcome, but the people that I reported were still there, and quite frankly are still there today.
Which is disheartening. And we should stop for a second and say one of the things that you talk about in the book is that the vast majority of the people that work with children of this nature are people who are well-intentioned and want to be effective with their individual students. But there are always people who are not responsible, people who aren't compassionate. I mean, I can't think of any other word. I mean, it seems inhuman, some of the things that are going on. So I don't want people to write in and say, that's not everybody. Richard is very well aware of that. But as parents and as teachers, we should all be aware of the fact that there are situations that we need to be aware of that are happening. This is not a needle in a haystack, and it wasn't just at one school. These kinds of things, and we've heard more and more about it in the news lately, that there are circumstances in which we have to be aware and take some action. But just want to let you know that Richard is not saying that all people who work with special needs kids are suspect and terrible.
Absolutely.
But having said that, how did this book come about? Like, how did you get inspired to write this book? And we'll talk about it because it's written in a very unique way.
Okay. When I finally left the school districts, which was a little bit over 2 years ago, I was working with a private family with a young man with autism. But even prior to that, one day the title of this book just came to me. I don't know why, it just came to me. And I wrote it down on a Post-it note and stuck it on my desk. And that was probably a year or two before I even started writing the book. The young man on the front cover, his name is Adam, and he's just a wonderful, wonderful young man. And he was a very big part of the inspiration for me writing this book, because this poor child was just treated terribly, and everybody just thought he was a terrible kid, and he wasn't a terrible kid. He was just treated terribly, and he reacted to the way that he was treated. And he's nonverbal, and I just wish that he could just go home and tell mom and dad what they were doing to him. And one of the things I talk about in the book, these kids do tell you things even though they don't use their words.
Yes.
And Adam is a classic example of that. Before he would go to school in the morning, when his mother would say, okay, it's time to go to school, he would either hide his shoes or throw them in the garbage.
Yeah.
And initially the parents, I think, thought that he was just playing a game, but he was not playing a game at all. He was telling them, I do not want to go to school.
Right, and it's actually quite clever if you stop and think about it. I have to put my shoes on in order to go to school, and I don't want to go to school, so I'm going to hide my shoes, which is going to delay it, or I'm going to throw them in the trash, which hopefully I won't have to go.
Absolutely. There's another girl that I talk about in the book, that when the bus pulled up to the school, she would take off all of her clothes right in the bus. And that was, people were saying, oh, she's this, she's that. No, that was her way of saying, I do not like the way, and this is my opinion, of course, I do not like the way that I'm being treated, and you can't take me off the bus if I don't have my clothes on.
Right. And I do think, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and we even talked about it this morning, if we can start to look at behavior, all behavior is communication. Absolutely. It's so interesting what we begin to see, right? Absolutely. And I have a wonderful co-host for one of the hours that we're here every week, Nancy Alspaugh-Jackson, and she says, I wish I could just get the message out to everyone that you must presume intelligence in all cases. And I think, you mentioned that Adam was nonverbal. A lot of these kids in the book that you're profiling, they are children who do not have the ability to say, mommy.
Right, exactly.
This is what happened to me in school. And I think that's a parent's nightmare.
Yeah.
Because you feel like, okay, my child is not conveying what's happening. And yet, in a lot of cases, children are trying to tell us.
Yes, they are. And we just, one of the quotes in the book from little Noah, he says, some of us may not be able to learn to talk, but all of you can learn to listen, even if that means using something other than your ears.
Yes.
And that's very, very important. These children, like you said, all behavior is communicative.
Yeah.
They're trying to tell us things. And I wrote this book because someone has to speak up for these children. Yeah. Someone has to say, hey, what's going on with some of these schools or with some of the staff is unacceptable, and people have to be held accountable, and it has to stop.
Yeah, and there's so many different levels to it, too. I mean, parents need to be aware. I think that a lot of times we hope for the best, and we hope that things are happening in a proper way at school, but we all need to be aware, and we're going to talk in a few minutes about some things that we can do to help ourselves to be aware. But I want to talk a little bit about the book and how you chose to write it. There are individual chapters that are individual children within the book, and you start the chapter from that individual child. You see that the first one here is Adam. You talk from that child's point of view. You take their perspective, which is a really interesting way in which, it's very emotional. It's hard sometimes to hear some of the things, but important that we do, right? And so you tell from the child's point of view what's happening. And then, I think when the average reader is thinking, well, but, that might be a stretch, and how are you knowing that that's what they're feeling? Then Richard goes on to explain, I'm looking for where it happens. Oh, I passed it. It literally says about Adam. And then Richard tells us what his experience working with Adam is, what he saw, which led him to say the things that he did from the child's perspective, and his relationship with the individual child, and consequences and actions that he took. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, if you were there and you saw these atrocities, why weren't you doing something? Because I certainly started going, well, somebody needs to do something. nothing. And then you read what Richard did to try to do something about it and what it was met with by different staff members, administrators. I said to him earlier, I can't believe that, you know, nobody's looking for you in a dark alley because you name names and take people to task for things that they have done and chose not to do. Right. And that's disturbing too. And again, we want to say that that's not the case with all administrators, but you know, we have to presume intelligence with our children, and we have to presume that we need to check and make sure if our children are safe and not assume that they aren't. So I love the fact that you told the stories in this way. It was shocking. And emotional, but you really we are always asking our children to take other people's perspectives, right? Especially with autism, because we know that's not one of their strengths usually. We're always asking them, take somebody else's perspective. Well, we need to take our children's perspectives, and that's exactly what Richard does, chapter by chapter, child by child. Where did you get that idea?
Well, I'm a people type of person. I always have been, and I can get along with a 5-year-old and spend an hour with a 5-year-old, and I can get along with an 85-year-old and spend an hour with an 85-year-old and have just as much fun with each individual. And one of the things I have always done throughout my life is put myself in that person's shoes. Try to see how they're looking at things, you know, try to see why they're thinking the way they're thinking, and that's what I've always done. So with these children, I tried to get inside of them and look out to see through their eyes what was happening. I talk about some of the restraints in this book and how you have 4 adults trying to restrain a little child, and they just say, well, we have to restrain him. Right. Well, how about looking at it from the kid's point of view, which is what I did in the book here. Here, I'm a little kid, and here's these 4 adults, these huge people, these huge creatures in my eyes, on top of me. The poor child is petrified. Right. And I believe if you look through other people's eyes all the time, try to see, everybody would just get along so much more better. Yeah. And I had my own issues as a child, which I talk about in the book, which up until about 5 years ago, quite frankly, I wasn't able to talk about just because of what I went through as a kid, and it's different nowadays. But I had epilepsy. I still struggle with dyslexia and ADD and things like that. And I remember how scared it was being in a crowd of people, whether it be a classroom, a store, or in the park, and waking up, I use the term waking up, coming out of a seizure, not knowing what happened, lying on the ground with everybody just staring at me like I was some sort of freak. Yeah. So I know in my heart what that feels like because I went through it. So I can relate somewhat to what some of these children go through. Certainly not totally, but that's why. I just wanted, you know, nobody ever asked me as a kid, how are you feeling after that seizure? How, you know, what are you going through? Does it bother you that people are staring? Nobody ever asked me those kind of questions. Right. So maybe that's why, because I get asked by parents all the time. I'm very good with these children. It's a gift from the Lord, quite frankly, and I get asked all the time, how did you do this? How did you do that? How did you calm down this child that no one else can calm down? Yeah. I don't have an answer for that. But I guess it's because of what I experienced myself as a child, and that's what I try to do.
Well, but clearly throughout the book, whenever you are introduced to a child, you demonstrate respect.
Absolutely. From
the very first moment, and compassion, and you do demonstrate listening. And what I saw throughout the book was that we were talking about this earlier about gaining compliance and how we want our children to trust us, and the way that we do that is by showing them time and time and time again who we are and how we will react. And it seems very clear to me in the book that you are very good at conveying that to children very quickly, that you are somebody that is going to treat them with compassion. And you talk in the book, when you're talking about you having these seizures, your brother demonstrating that to you, that compassion, and that you trying to carry carry that forward. It's a very poignant moment in the book.
Exactly.
It's really lovely. As if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, I'm outraged at these things happening in the classroom, and I said this to Richard, I can only talk so much about these negative things before I go, okay, what can we do about it? Because I can't be in a place of just saying, okay, this is what it is. I got to know what to do about it. So we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to detail some of the different things that Richard recommends that we can do, and that we can recommend that teachers and aides and administrators do that are working, anybody who is being a part of our child's team and working with them, questions that they can be asking themselves to keep themselves in a place where they're showing respect for our individual children. So stick with us. More with Richard Stripp when we come back. Welcome back to Autism Live. If you're just joining us, we are here right now with author Richard Stripp, who is author of the book, Mommy, I Wish I Could Tell You What They Did to Me in School Today. We're talking about what an important, pivotal book this is. And before we went to break, I was saying I can only talk so long about something, and then I got to talk about what can we do to make it better, right? Because we have to empower ourselves. But I want to stop for just a second and say, where can people get this book?
Okay, the easiest way is to just go online onto my website, which is mommyiwish.com, and there's a link there to purchase it. Everyone carries it. Barnes & Noble has it online. You can get it in the Nook version or paperback. Amazon has it for their Kindle.
Okay.
The Sony has it. It's available in all electronic versions. It's available, obviously, in paperback and in hardcover as well. So if you go on mommyiwish.com, there's a link to purchase that will give you numerous options of how to buy it.
And it's a very quick read. I found that I wanted to read it in small increments because I got emotional. But I know other people, read it and read the whole thing in one sitting. It's very readable, and I think once you get a little ways into it too, you almost can't stop because you want to get to what can I do. So let's talk a little bit, and I wanted you to read a little bit to us from page 102 of the book. Okay. Some questions that you put down in writing about what somebody can be asking themselves to see if the way they're behaving with a child is proper and respectful.
Yes, I came up with just 3 simple questions that anyone in a school, or it doesn't even have to be a school, it can be working anywhere with a child, can ask themselves. And I'll read right from the book here. And I use this numerous times in the schools I was at.
I'm sure.
I have a simple test that school personnel can give themselves to assure that they are interacting with a child in a manner that is appropriate and acceptable. The test involves asking oneself 3 questions. Number 1, if someone was treating me in the same manner in which I am treating this child, would I be fine with it?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And
simple.
It's simple and it's to the point, and a lot of times people might think, duh, but I think some people are not thinking in these terms, and it's a good question. Okay, question number 2.
Question number 2, if someone was treating my son or daughter in the manner in which I'm treating this child, would I be fine with it?
Yeah, because if you're not, then you should not be behaving in that way. And of course, number 3.
And number 3, and this is very important.
Cuts right to it, doesn't it?
If this child's mom and dad were standing there watching me, would I still be treating this child in this manner?
Absolutely.
And then I go on to say, I believe that if one can answer yes honestly to all 3 of those questions, then they are most likely fine in how they are treating that child.
And this brings up, there was a big case recently in the news that we're both aware of, Stuart Chaffetz, the dad in New Jersey, who stuck a tape recorder in his child's pocket and sent him off to school, and came home and had some really interesting discussions that I'm just going to guess would not have happened if mom or dad had been standing right there.
Absolutely.
And I don't really understand how anybody can defend themselves if they're willing to answer those questions honestly. If you're not doing those things, I think it's indefensible. It
is indefensible, and I talk about traps in the book too. Matter of fact, it's a chapter named Traps. And
I have to say, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I thought that was a really amazing chapter that every parent should read, because I thought it was really gentle the way you said we all fall into traps traps every day, that things happen, that sometimes you lose track of things.
Absolutely.
And I thought that it was really very forgiving, the way in which you talk about it, that we are all prone to this, that, you know, sometimes you're busy on the phone or talking to somebody and you lose track of what's most important.
You forget. A common mistake that I've found, especially with nonverbal children, is that people assume if that child is nonverbal, that they don't hear and understand everything that's being said to them and around them.
Yeah.
And that's one of the traps I talk about in the book, where staff in these schools will just talk about a child right in front of the child, like the child can't understand what they're saying. And they say horrible things about the child's hygiene, about the child's parents.
Right.
And it's just terrible. And it's a trap that they fall into. Another trap, because as an educator, you might not see the progress you want to see, that you expect to see with a neurotypical child, that you just assume that these children can't learn.
Right.
And they don't even try to teach them. And that's a horrible, horrible trap to fall into.
Yeah.
And it, unfortunately, it happens all the time.
And I think, you know, what I love about the chapter is that it's not accusatory at all. No. It just says, here's what you got to think about. You got to think about what's most important. And I know, as a former teacher, there was a day with my child where the thought crossed my mind, maybe he's not teachable. You know, I didn't know enough about autism in that moment, and it did. The darkest moment, the darkest day, but the thought crossed my mind, because I'd tried so many different things. I hadn't tried ABA yet, but I had not been able to get my child to learn the most rudimentary of things after he descended into autism. And I thought, oh my goodness, maybe my child is unteachable. And I always think about that and think, if that occurred to me, his mother, and a teacher, then I have to be forgiving if someone does not understand how teachable he is. It is part of my job as an advocate and as his mother to make sure that his teachers and the people who work with him know that he is teachable.
Well, thank goodness you never gave up, because your son is a testimony to
he is
not
so
giving
teachable.
up. And as far as teachers go, and I have said this right to their faces, and it didn't go over very well, but, you know, teachers have just said to me, well, the kid's not going to learn anyway.
Right.
Well, you know what? You're a teacher. Every 2 weeks, you're taking a paycheck for teaching.
Yes.
So whether you think the child will learn or not, and shame on you for thinking that,
right.
But you're taking your paycheck, so earn your pay.
Figure it out.
Earn your pay.
And we're here to support you to figure it out. If you don't know how to figure it out and you're at a loss, and you say, we're here to help you, because you can figure it out. These kids are teachable.
Absolutely.
They're all teachable. And I always say here, we don't give up on anybody. We're not going to give up on you. You're not going to give up on your kids or your students. That's not happening. So, as a parent, though, you give some advice in the book about things that we can be doing. Tell our viewers at home, if you've got a child in school, how do we make sure that this isn't happening to our child?
First of all, insist that the people, whether it be the teacher, an aide, a school bus driver, has the proper training, specifically with whatever your child's disability is. The schools that I've worked at, my wife and I, who worked with me, by the way, when we did respite work through an organization for the state of New Jersey, we received intensive training before we were even, and I talk about that in the book, before we were even allowed to spend 1 minute with a child.
Right.
These schools, anyone that I've worked at, they don't require that training at all. A lot has changed now. I didn't go to college because of my dyslexia. I just wasn't able to do that. I was hired without a college degree, and that was fine. But now a lot of the districts are requiring 60 college credits, even for the aides and the teacher assistants. But it could be 60 college credits in manhole cover removal. It doesn't have to be specifically, and that's wrong. So
it is wrong.
As a parent, go meet the people that are going to be working with your child, and don't be afraid to ask questions. You know, do you know what autism is? Do you know what the traits of an autistic child are? Because if you don't, if you're going to be upset that a child is flapping his hands and moving his head, and you're going to restrain that child because that's bothering you, which I talk, and that happens, That's a problem. So number one for parents is know who's working with your children and insist that they have the proper training.
Yeah, and you can write that into your IEP, by the way, too. And you can put in writing and say, I want to know what everybody who has access to my child and is in their care, I want to know what their credentials are and what their experience is and how long. And put it in writing, and they need to tell you. They won't necessarily tell you where they got their degrees from, but they have to tell you what their experience is. Force them.
And
so good point.
Another important issue, I believe, is you should be able to just show up at any time during the course of the day at your child's school and just go check on them. Now, you've got to understand that the schools can't just have parents walking in and out of the classrooms, and that's fine. But let me just walk down the hall and just peek in the window. All the classrooms have windows. Peek in the window of the classroom and see what my child's doing. See what you're doing with my child.
Yeah.
Parents would be shocked to see their children strapped in these chairs, facing a wall, all the kids facing a wall or just stuck in front of a television when the lesson plan's saying they're learning this, that, and the other thing. And the teacher and the aides are just sitting there talking about what they watched on television the night before. So ask your school if it's okay to just come in unannounced and just take a look. Not walk in their class. I don't want to disrupt the class. I understand it. And if the school tells you no, to me, that's a red flag.
Oh, yes.
You know, what are you trying to hide? You know, I'm not going to be disturbing anything. I want to see. And Adam's mom, one of the things that she did was just that. Showed up numerous times to find her son being screamed at, strapped in his chair, and stuck in a corner. Then all of a sudden, the school didn't allow her to just show up.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
When it's time to move.
That's a problem.
Right.
And what I recommend in the book, which hasn't happened yet, but hopefully, and I think today with the technology we have today, is cameras in classrooms.
Yeah.
And there are certainly confidentiality issues that have to be addressed. But how about webcams with the computers? My sons would know this better than me. And just a webcam that each individual parent is given a passcode. And at any time of the day can just punch in their passcode and look at any classroom, gymnasium, cafeteria, playground to check in on their children.
They have that for dog kennels, for heaven's sake.
Absolutely. And if the staff knew that at any time mom or dad would just look, 95% of these things that I talk about in this book would go away.
Yeah. And until we can make that happen, one of the things that I want to recommend to people is volunteer. Say, I'm here to volunteer. Get to know the people who are working with your children. See how they deal with things in the classroom. You'll get a wealth of knowledge. And you'll see how the support staff works and who comes in and out of the classroom. You know, I had the opportunity when my son was little to volunteer like twice a week. And I know everybody doesn't have that opportunity, but find the time to volunteer. And I grew to have such a bigger respect that, you know, both the vice principal and the principal at my son's school do unannounced drop-ins on every single classroom every single day.
Absolutely.
And you gotta love that because nobody's getting away with anything, right? And you know what? The teachers are also good and they know that's happening, and that's what and if your principal isn't doing that, put pressure on them too, because there's nothing more important than them knowing what's going on in every single classroom every single day.
And the principals, I talk about a couple of principals in my book. If they don't have the right attitude,
the
staff
goes from the top down.
Absolutely. When I had numerous meetings with the principal of the one school and I complained about what was going on, the principal's response to me was, well, Rick, you can't change people.
Right.
And that's just ridiculous.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
And you know what? If they don't want to change and you're not going to hold them accountable and insist that they do their jobs, there's the door.
Right, for all of you.
Yeah.
You and them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, how about doing your job?
Yeah, how about that? How about earning your pay? And this job sometimes is not easy. It is not a job for everyone. You have to be a very compassionate person, you have to be a very understanding person, and you have to be a very patient person. And sometimes children will act out physically and turn their aggression towards you. If you take that personal, you shouldn't be there.
Absolutely.
Because it is not personal.
Right.
That child does not mean to hurt you. That child is acting out for numerous reasons. Again, all behavior is communicative.
Communicative, yes.
Thank you.
It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful.
And so even the best people can get burnt out.
Yes,
and you know what? Sometimes take a step back. If you're a one-on-one aide with a challenging child that you're having a hard time dealing with, and you need a break, tell your teacher, tell the principals, you know, I need a couple days to just walk away, and I need a change of pace to just get myself together.
Absolutely.
Because you don't want to get burnt out. These children deserve better than that.
They do. They do. And good people who are able to say those things, they deserve to be able to have that break as well. And you mentioned a couple of times, but this really is a family affair for you with your family.
Yes, it is.
So you worked in a classroom and did respite, and your wife?
My wife is still working in a school district. My lovely wife, Liz. She's working in a school district with special needs children. She also did respite work with me through the same organization that I worked with. My son, Dan. My son Dan is a special education teacher with his master's degree in special education, and he has a bachelor's degree in developmental psychology, and he teaches an autistic class of 4th graders in a public school in New Jersey. And my son Ricky is also a college man with his degree. Both of my boys went to the College of New Jersey, and Rick Jr. Was gracious enough to write the beautiful things on the back cover of the book, and Dan edited the book for me, and found numerous spelling errors and stuff on my part, and punctuation errors.
Well, it's a family affair, and it's a wonderful thing. I really encourage you to get Richard's book. Mommy, I wish I could tell you what they did to me in school today.
My daughter reads it and cries.
Well, I think it's unlikely that you will read it and not shed a few tears. So get the box of Kleenex ready. But there's a lot of information in here that will open your eyes and help you to, you always talk about this, be a more efficient, more effective member of your child's team. And this book will help you to do that. So Richard, thank you so much for being with us as part of your vacation.
Thank you.
And oh yes, thank you, Emily, for reminding me. We are going to give away, Richard has given us a copy of the book to give away. You'll need to check later on today on our Facebook page. You'll be given instructions of what you need to do so that you can win this copy. We'll have the contest go for a week. We'll announce the winner of it when I get back a week from Monday. So visit our Facebook page, and we will have it up there a little after the show. We'll have it up there, and you can win a copy of this book so that you can get the important information that it's in it. But thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your trip, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you very, very much, and to all the moms and dads out there with these beautiful children, God bless you.
Well, and thank you for being a wonderful light in their lives and in our lives.
Thank you.